All right, thank you for joining today's webinar, Total Cost of Ownership, iPad versus Chromebook. We're so excited for today's speaker, Dave Eisenmann. Dave has been the Director of Instructional Technology and Media Services at Minnetonka Public Schools since 2003. Prior to this, he spent 8 years as a classroom teacher. He's an assistant professor at St. Mary's University, Minneapolis, and has also taught classes on instructional technology for the University of Minnesota. Dave is the author of the blog, The Next Tech Thing, and my name is Max Polsky, and I'm a solutions architect here at Jamf. Today, Dave will talk you through Minnetonka Public Schools' iPad and Chromebook story, starting with an overview of the school district, what they considered as they scoped out a one-to-one iPad program, and how they compared iPad versus Chromebook, including their total cost of ownership calculation, the results they achieved, and tips for schools making the same comparison. We'll save time at the end for QA, and if you have any questions throughout today's webinar, please enter them in the QA chat box, and we'll answer as many as we can at the end. And with that, I'm going to hand things over to today's speaker. Welcome, Dave.
All right. Thank you, Max. Thanks for having me here today, and welcome everyone that's on this call with us this afternoon here from Minnesota. We're going to begin with overview of kind of Minnetonka Public Schools. We have 9 of them, 1 high school, 2 middles, and then 6 elementaries. And we currently are doing iPads one-to-one with our 5th through 12th grade students. So we have got about 6,600 iPads in the hands of those students. We're in the 7th year of our iPad program. And we do have iPads at the lower grades, a 5-to-1 ratio in the K through 4 classes. In addition to being a Google Apps school, we use some of Apple's education features. For example, we're using the Apple Classroom app. That's used by teachers frequently to guide students through class as well as conduct summative assessments. We also use the Apple School Manager to generate managed Apple IDs for our kids under age 13. We're using Jamf to manage our Apple devices, and here's a few reasons why we chose Jamf. We love its speedy over-the-air deployment. So currently we're putting iPads in the hands of students. For example, our new 5th graders this past September who received their iPads, we got iPads to them in under an hour from basically taking it out of the box and getting it in their hands and having them log in. So we love how speedy it is for that deployment. The ability that we can customize the iPad experience tailored to each student. So if one kid needs a specific app or a tool, Jamf allows us to individually deliver that tool right to that one student. Of course, the security that is offered through the mobile device management system. Using Jamf, we can track where an iPad is if one comes up as missing or lost or perhaps even stolen, as well as for a child who forgets his or her password, the remote password reset and wiping ability is super nice. It's a great way to track and tally our hardware and software assets. I already mentioned a little bit too early here, I guess, for the bullet. The last one here is the ability to deliver individual paid apps to a single student, but just the fact that we can deliver that out to an entire grade, or just the calculus class gets a specific app, or just the English class gets a specific textbook or tool or things like that, are all possible through the managed groups within Jamf. So let's talk a little bit about how we got here in the first place, where we are today now 7 years later, and why we chose and have stuck with iPads over Chromebooks for our district's one-to-one program. We really began with a goal about 8 years ago of looking at one-to-one and trying to figure out how we're going to meaningfully integrate technology for the students in our schools. We didn't want to just have technology for the sake of it. We didn't just want to get tools in their hands, but we really wanted to look at how we're going to provide more meaning and deeper learning for the students. So after a lot of analysis and looking at the tools that were available at the time, and iPads had pretty much just come out and been in the market a year prior to our beginning with them. We decided and selected the iPad. And we initially thought that iPads would last about 3 years. I mean, that tends to be kind of a rule of thumb for device durability in an educational setting. And the device itself was so new, no one really knew how long it would last. So initially we encountered some objections. People were worried about all the glass in a tablet. They thought it wouldn't last. They were worried about kind of the inner parts and pieces within the iPad itself. The only other tool at the time was either a full-blown laptop or netbooks were out and available in the market. They were really pretty poor quality, and it wasn't until we'd been in our iPad program for a while that kind of Chromebooks kind of got brought to the market and started being touted as an alternative to iPads. And there was a lot of hype around those Chromebooks. They were kind of boasting their lower price. And if you work in education, you know that when you make technology choices, you need to answer to your community and defend those choices. And one of the things that we have done is we have kind of reanalyzed our choice a number of different times over the past 7 years. Should we stick with iPads or should we switch over to Chromebooks? As we saw some neighboring districts, and occasionally there were news headlines and such across the country of districts that had left their iPad program and switched over to Chromebooks. In the Twin Cities area here, some of the first initial Chromebook rollouts had a lot of issues. The hardware themselves wasn't kind of quality built. There were some problems early on. One neighboring district had screws loose inside the Chromebooks themselves that the students could shake them around and you could hear the noise, and the staff had little super glue bottles and little screwdrivers that they were using with those, and just a lot of wear and tear with all the moving parts and problems with the hinges, and the initial rollout was pretty messy. But as time passed, those problems were fixed, things were manufactured better, and rollout got smoother, and since Chromebooks appeared to have kind of improved in both the hardware build quality and that rollout ability, once again we looked at what was possible within our school district, and we still found some pretty major limitations for this for the second round, so to speak, of looking at things. I was up until I believe about a year and a half ago. Google Earth didn't even work on a Chromebook. Google Expeditions also didn't work on Chromebooks. Initially, the storage on the device was limited. Originally, it was just in the cloud. Now there is some storage available on Chromebooks, so that's certainly improved, but it was still limited as we were evaluating it. The video editing capabilities with a Chromebook, I believe, are still pretty limited. We've seen some mixed results with the video capabilities and using the internet video editing capabilities of that tool. YouTube came out and now just, I believe, about a month ago, discontinued its editing ability of videos. So you're really limited, and video is a super important tool in education, and we really didn't want to limit our students in those capabilities. Initial models of Chromebooks, and most of them still, I believe, don't have any sort of rear-facing camera. It's all just kind of that front-facing camera. So even those flip Chromebooks still are going to have one camera on it, which makes it pretty difficult to film something and see what you're filming at the same time. A lot of Chromebook models don't flip down and turn into a tablet, and the newer models certainly do, but they're certainly more pricey and even more expensive than an iPad. And the amount of educational apps is ever increasing that are available for Chromebooks, but it's still limited if you compare it to the Apple App Store, and some of the major tools that we've been using for years and were kind of key components of our program are still not available in the Apple App Store, or in the Chromebook kind of Google Play Store. I'm sorry, I should have had round two up here as I went through all these things, but I'll just leave that up for a second so you can kind of reread through some of those main bulleted points of the continued limitations we found with Chromebooks. So those features and functionality weren't enough to just kind of compare the value add of a Chromebook versus the value add of an iPad. So what we did is we created our own total cost of ownership methodology to determine which tool was best for our students. And so basically when we started out, a few years ago anyway, an iPad was still at about a $400 price point when you looked at the cost of the iPad and the case and the apps. And I realize there's other costs for a one-to-one program too. Apps, cost money. But one of the things I'll point out in this total kind of cost tally here is that the apps you have they don't disappear when your device is old or you get rid of it. You maintain the licensing on that. So our apps that we have used now in our 7th year were purchased 7 years ago. It's not like we have to buy those new every single year. There's mobile device management systems have an annual licensing fee, but that's just a few cents a year, and the licensing costs as well as infrastructure and staffing support expenditures come with any device, whether it's laptops, Chromebooks, or iPads. So Jamf has a fee with it, but so do Chromebooks to have a management fee. And we actually have seen that the fee for Jamf is about half of what it is for a Chromebook annual fee. So that's also a cost savings. If you take that $400 iPad and you divide it out over 5 years and 180 school days, it comes out to about 44 cents a day that you're paying for that device. And that $400 price certainly is not true anymore, but one of the things I'd like to point out here is the fact that that $400 price isn't exactly how you should be looking at the cost of that iPad, because what happens is when you go to get rid of your devices and you want to do a refresh, that cost gets brought down by the resale value or the residual value of the hardware itself. So the $400 actually for us, when we sold them after 5 years, I believe we got about $58 per iPad for that tool. So that brings it down to $342, I think, Max, if that's right. I don't know. I'm just looking at you right here, asking you to do some math. So that price then, if you divide it out, comes down to about 38 cents a day, which is a pretty nice low cost. Now, one of the things that has changed since those initial devices that we had is the fact that an iPad no longer costs $400. The educational pricing right now on the current model of iPads is $294 a piece. So let's just say about $300 a year. And we're actually keeping our iPads for 6 years. And if you divide that out over 180 school days, it's 28 cents a day. But again, factoring in the residual value for an iPad, which 5 or 6 years later is still at around that $60 range. The current price is about $65 for that iPad that's 6 years old. You're down to about 22 cents a day. Now, what's really nice about this is to compare that kind of total cost with a Chromebook, because a lot of times people look at Chromebooks and that initial low cost, and they maybe have a Chromebook priced around $200. That Chromebook maybe comes out to be less per day, but then if you factor whether or not that Chromebook can even last 6 years and whether or not that Chromebook has a touch screen or some of these other features that we've talked about, you're really looking at a tool that is more expensive overall for a shorter period of time. Most of the friends who I have who are tech directors in other districts that are using Chromebooks are factoring that their Chromebook will last at least 3 years. Some of them are getting 4, hoping for 5 out of it, and they are not planning on anything longer than kind of that 5-year span. What we do with our iPads is we take the one-to-one devices after they've been with our upper grade students in 6th through 12th grade, and we move those down to our lower grades. So they go to our elementary school children from kindergarten through 4th grade, and we're at about a 3-to-1 ratio for that. I believe I misspoke earlier. I think in the initial intro I said 5-to-1, but I should have said 3-to-1. I apologize for that. And those are still really good devices for those fourth graders or second graders. And some of those that we're using are 6 years old, and they're still running, and they're able to do the video editing and run Google Earth or whatever on them. So again, factoring in the length of time that an iPad lasts compared to the length of time a Chromebook lasts, and that residual value, I believe you really need to take a close look at that total cost of ownership over time, and see what you're getting for that dollars. It may look cheaper up front from the get-go, but by the time you factor in that value afterwards, plus then now what you're also getting besides just kind of that lower overall cost of a device that lasts longer. The iPad is a great creation device. It's not just a consumption device or not just a typing on a document type device or typing in a box device. You can use it for all sorts of subject areas. I always like to ask people who are maybe debating the Chromebook versus iPads to think about all the subjects within a child's school day that are whether or not their devices are being used. For example, our iPads are used by our students daily throughout the entire math class. Students are using their finger or a stylus to work on their math equations and draw and sketch and annotate notes. Our students are using them in their music classes. We have iPads on music stands where they can, obviously like flip the page of the music with their finger, but they can also annotate and write on top of the notes and make markings where they need to remember to play the note a little bit louder, or etc. Students in our PE classes are using iPads for filming and making videos and tutorials for one another, using stop motion animation throughout a lot of our classes and subject areas. We even have our swim team using iPads in Ziploc bags underwater to film themselves in the pool and talk about strokes and turns at the end of the lane and so on. A lot of times people complain about iPads and say, well, they don't have a keyboard. And we've found that students overall are fine without one. I say overall because we aren't opposed to a student purchasing a keyboard and bringing that around with their iPad. We allow that. We did do some pilots of keyboard cases, and most of the kids did not want them. They didn't want that extra weight. They really wanted to streamline the device and keep it kind of as thin and as light as possible. And it's the adults who seem to have the problem with the typing on the glass, and the kids are used to it. I really believe we need to think outside the keyboard. 21st century skills around creativity really disrupt that traditional world of a keyboard in a two-dimensional workspace, and we need to really push for instructional change. And I believe the iPad is a great tool to do that. That doesn't just push for kind of substitution of paper versus keyboard digital work within the classroom. I've already mentioned some of the great things our students are doing with green screens and keyboards and using their fingertips and not having to draw on the screen with a mouse or anything like that. Certainly the speed and efficiency is great of an iPad, and this over-the-air management that's possible with Jamf is just wonderful. A lot of our iPads never even have to be touched by an adult or IT staff person after they're removed from the box, which is another efficiency and cost savings. All right, Max, so let's also talk about the results of our program overall. One of the things that we have seen result in our students is we've seen an increase in test scores. That I do have, and I will share with you some links to some more information about our program in general, but that certainly sounds like a blanket statement that you'd want some proof behind. And so you can take a look at that on our website, because when we initially began our pilot 7 years ago, we gave iPads to half of our freshman students and half without. And we really analyzed the scores and assessment results of students in our iPad group and then our our control group of students without iPads. And over the past 7 years, we've seen, since we've been using iPads, we've seen student test scores increase just across the board. We've got higher than ever ACT scores at our high school. We use the NWEA, and we're seeing higher scores than ever in that. So just a lot of positive results. Another great result has just been through our professional development for our staff, that we have seen just an increase in use of technology for really deeper learning and meaningful learning. And we've moved really beyond the basics of kind of that initial adoption stage, or that initial substitution stage that just naturally would happen within any technology tool adoption. And we're at much kind of more meaningful, engaging ways of using technology. And then I've already mentioned the fact that the mobile device management really allows us to control and manage the devices, and I think that's super important in a one-to-one program. On the screen now, I've got our teaching and learning framework, and I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Minnetonka or some of the things that we're doing, but over the past couple of years, we've developed this teaching and learning framework that you see here that really covers your 21st century skills, like your 4 C's, communication, creativity, collaboration, critical thinking, etc. But also we took a look at some of the other skills you see on here, plus the role that technology plays in all that, which is on the bottom row of this framework. And you can take a closer look at this, and in the links you'll get at the end of this webinar, you can dig into this a little bit more. But if you think of, perhaps you're familiar with SAMR, kind of starting with that substitution level and working your way up toward redefinition level, what we did is we didn't want to just look at how technology is used and at what level it is used, but we also wanted our teachers and students to be thinking about, how are you creating and to what extent, and communicating and collaborating and so on. And so we've defined this out, and the iPad has been a key component of making us be successful in our teaching and learning, and the successful in this implementation of our framework in these 8 dimensions of learning. So students are creating, collaborating, critical thinking, and communicating in those kind of 21st century skills I mentioned. And this is all done in a much more personalized, authentic way, and in authentic situations, based largely on the integration of iPads into our classrooms. This link, or the couple links that I have here, are to Minnetonka Schools, where you can learn more about our iPad program, minnetonkaschools.org/iPad, as well as I blog regularly for about the past 3 or so years, and have a lot of information with all sorts of videos about our iPad program, and it's at thenexttechthing.blogspot.com. The image that we've got on the screen here is an invitation for you, if you'd like to come visit us in Minnetonka and see more of what we're doing, not just with iPads, but school in general. We are really kind of redefining what 21st century education looks like. We've got Spanish and Chinese immersion beginning in kindergarten in our classrooms, amazing student business internship programs and research study programs and arts programs and more. So take a look at that information, and you're certainly welcome to come to Minnesota. It'll be warmer in April, on that April 5th date in 2018. A few other tips that I'd mention in here are when it comes to a one-to-one program would be, I think, first and foremost, if you're just starting out, please don't do it all at once. Really consider an incremental rollout. You just can't prepare for everything that's going to come at you as teachers are learning to use things, as students are, and so on. And so, like I said, we started with just half our 9th grade, and the second semester rolled it out to the other half of ninth grade. So that was about 700 students. I think our second year we bumped it up to ninth and 10th grade. And then the year after that, we added a couple more and so on until we got to this point where we now have this 6,600 students using devices. You certainly can roll stuff out, and wonderful tools like Jamf and the slick way that iPads can be rolled out could allow you to do tens of thousands at once. But then what you need to factor in is the other stuff, the professional development and the support for your teachers to get them to do more than just have these on and using them in a really kind of basic substitution way. So investing in that professional development is super important. We have instructional technology coaches. We have 6 coaches who work with our teachers. They're either these coaches are either full-time or part-time technology coaches, so like 0.4 to 0.8, and I've got a couple that are 1.0 who are just, their day-to-day job is working with teachers to kind of push them into higher levels of technology use. We give our teachers staff development throughout the year, about on average around 10 hours or so a year of staff development that's done in about 2 to 4 sessions a year. Maybe it's a half-day sub, or it's an after-school class, or before school, or a summer session. And that training is all focused on technology, really not the device itself, but we use our Minnetonka Teaching and Learning Framework and talk about how to use technology to kind of further push ahead those skills, like getting students to collaborate at higher levels, or communicate, or critically think. Another tip that I've got on here, the tip number 3, is minimizing distractions. We have had great success, especially compared to some colleagues whom I've spoken with in other districts where it's kind of a free-for-all and students can kind of do whatever they want with the device and installing tools or software or downloading things free from the App Store, the entire Apple App Store, or so on. We've really minimized our distractions, and that has really helped, and it's made a quicker adoption for our teachers when there's less distractions in that classroom environment, and they can focus on education and helping students learn rather than dealing with things like text messaging or video gaming and so on. So that controlled environment is really helpful. And then the importance of managing those devices with a tool like Jamf.
And that's where we come in. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Jamf, we help organizations succeed with Apple, and we embrace the native Apple technology experience consumers have come to know and love, and we have 0-day support for all our Apple releases, supporting new operating systems, features from Apple the day they are available. And Dave, you know how important that is with a big environment. So with the focus on the end user, Jamf Pro automates common IT tasks and gives users the ability to set up and support their own devices. So we focus on areas of zero-touch deployment, robust device configuration, app management, inventory, security, and for end-user empowerment, the ability to offer self-service app catalog for its end users. And then this is one of my favorite slides. We've been focused on Apple device management for more than 15 years, and Jamf has deep roots in commitment to education. So we manage over 5 million devices for more than 5,000 education institutions, which is just absolutely awesome. If you guys are interested in learning more, head to jamf.com and fill out our Contact Us to talk with one of our Apple experts about your Apple deployment strategy. And don't forget to join Jamf Nation. It's the largest Apple admin community online. Swap best practices, troubleshoot any scenario, and you can have contact with like-minded peers in technology. Really, really a great resource. I think there's something like 40,000 admins in there. So I want to thank you all for joining us. I want to thank you, Dave.
Yeah, thank you for having me here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And with that, we have saved some questions. If you guys have any other questions, please type the questions in the QA chat box. But we have one queued up right here. And the question, Dave, is what are Minnetonka's future plans for the iPad program?
All right, Max. Well, we're planning to continue with iPads. As I mentioned, we have increased the ratio of iPads in our elementary classrooms, our K-4 classrooms, so we're now at a 3-to-1 ratio. We begin the 1-to-1 in 5th grade. Eventually, we'd like to build that up so that we'd get closer to a 1-to-1 ratio in even those K-4 classrooms. We're excited about the lower price point of iPads in general. That certainly helps us use our money even, spread the wealth, so to speak, even further. The possibilities that are coming out with like the Apple VR kit that's in the latest iPads that our students have is certainly a lot of promise for the future. I think a lot of those AR and VR experiences for students with virtual field trips and such are kind of going to be part of that future classroom, and the latest model of iPad allows our students to have those experiences right now.
Awesome. I am just scrolling through here. How about this one? Do you factor the unknown variable of iOS updates and hardware incompatibility? We are now running into the issue of apps no longer working on iOS 9 that can't be upgraded.
Right. We do have, like with iPad 2s, kind of those original iPad 2s from 7 years ago, we are kind of filtering those out of our system or using them in situations where that upgraded iOS is not needed, or those upgraded apps aren't needed, and the apps that still do work on those very oldest devices are still applicable. So whether it's used in maybe more of a kind of a station setting in a classroom rather than a 1-to-1 device, we don't have any of our students who are in our 1-to-1 program using devices that are 6 or more years old. They're using devices that are 3 years or 2 years or 1 year old. Here's another question in here about how did Minnetonka communicate the value of iPads over Chromebooks to teachers and parents? We did a lot of surveying our parents and students and teachers. A lot of it is done through our website and email communications. Our instructional technology coaches and our media staff work hard to really find some of those great stories and innovative uses of the tool and highlight those for not only the rest of the staff in their building, but we also put that information out to all of our parents in weekly newsletters. There's always a little kind of feature corner of how iPads were used to extend student learning or deepen student learning. We have numerous videos. We're fortunate to have a videographer in our district whose works to just really kind of document and teach our community as a whole how we are educating students in Minnetonka, and many of those videos are focused on how we're using technology, and so those are all available on our district website, so you could take a look at those. But we also produce those videos and share them with our parents in the community, and of course the kids can see them too on our website.
So what do you do for testing? One large cost saving we used for justifying Chromebooks was the amount of labs we were able to get rid of due to the Chromebooks. With the iPads, do you find you have to keep a lot more traditional labs?
No. In fact, you can do both MAP and MCA tests. This must be someone from Minnesota. You can do those on the iPad. I am not our assessment guy. We do have a director of assessment, and he can speak to exactly which tests can be done on what, but we have eliminated the labs out of almost every one of our schools. We do have some computer labs at our high school that are used for some very computer-based classes, such as a business ed class or a coding class where the coding program itself isn't run on or doesn't run on an iPad. Although now with Swift that has come out just in the past year or so, Apple's Swift playgrounds on the iPad, we have incorporated that into our computer coding curriculum, and we're starting to teach that for our coding classes, as well as we begin coding in kindergarten. And so the fact that Swift is now available on iPads means that we don't even need to have a desktop or a laptop on a cart or anything like that for the kids to do coding and have those experiences.
Awesome. I think you did mention this, but it's a great question. So after how many years do you pass down to the lower grades?
Yeah, I believe I did mention that already, Max, that our kids in the one-to-one program have a device for 3 years. And then in that 4th year, we take the device and we move that down to our lower grades. And we've been doing that now for a while here. So we try and keep it at around 3 years. But because of just kind of the overall ability to use that device longer than 3 years, we are talking about having our one-to-one kids possibly keep their iPads now for 4 years so that we could even have more use without having to buy kind of the newer devices. Here's another question about someone must know that our students in Minnetonka keep their iPads year-round, because this question says, how does Minnetonka handle iPad issues that happen over the summer when they're in possession of a student? And we have a system set up so that a student who maybe has a technical issue or some sort of damage that wants to have that serviced or needs to have it serviced in the summer, so like July, they can bring it into our district office and they leave it with us, and then they can pick it up once it's been fixed. Or if it's a problem that can be resolved right then and there, when they bring it in, our tech staff can help them with it. But that is something I didn't mention actually on this webinar, is that kind of in this total cost of ownership model, we have our one-to-one students keep their device year-round. So we give it to them, and up until this year, they've been keeping it for 3 full years in a row, summers included. And then we had been collecting them and giving them to the lower grades and then giving them a new iPad if they're still in our school system. But now we may have that, like I just mentioned, go even longer into maybe the 4-year range before we collect them. So we find that it's a lot of savings on time, certainly in collecting all those devices and tracking them and logging them. Our students take care of them over the summer. Some are using them for our Tonka online classes and just general learning. And it's just another kind of total cost savings. And we could really, in a way, take that TCO number and divide it by 365 instead of just 180 school days.
Okay, we're going to do 2 more questions. Are students accessing online textbooks, and have you run into any vendors that are only Flash-based?
Yeah, most of our, I wouldn't say most, but I'd say many of our student books are now electronic based. And with most new textbook adoptions, a publisher will now just kind of throw in the e-version, so to speak, but they still kind of want to sell you that print version. We're actually kind of purchasing less of the kind of traditional textbooks now. For example, many of our math classes at the high schools, the teachers have really developed their own kind of text and curriculum and are producing that, and it's just all electronic rather than giving the kids any sort of textbook to check out. But the other part of that question was about Flash. That was a much bigger problem 7 years ago when we started. And it's not so much of an issue anymore because Flash is just kind of so old school and going away. But there are still occasionally some sites or some tools, or some of those textbook publishers still seem to be in the 20th century, so they still are kind of using some of those Flash tools. And worst case scenario, we obviously you can't use that if it's not supported. But even like the PhET, those PhET, the physics simulations and stuff that our high school teachers and students use and love so much, they've redeveloped a lot of that into HTML5 over the past four 4 or 6 years or so. So now it almost all works on the iPad.
Awesome. Last question, Dave. How do you factor in the cost of repair for iPads versus Chromebooks? We have a much higher rate of damage / dysfunctional iPads to Chromebooks.
I guess that's Joe. I'm not super familiar with the cost of repair for Chromebooks, but we do not have a lot of iPad repairs. Figuratively, or as you look over the whole range of 6,600 devices in the hands of students used pretty much every hour of the school day. So that certainly is something to factor in, but it hasn't been a major deal for us. We do offer an optional insurance program for our families. That's on our website at that minnetonkaschools.org/iPad. You can click on insurance. We charge students $40 for the 365 days a year that they have their iPad, and they can just keep renewing that. But that's usually most often just used for like a glass crack or something, but it's pretty rare that happens. We use the STM DUX, DUX case, and it's been a wonderful case for us now for about 4 or 5 years. Kind of hard rubber edges and stuff, those can get dropped or tossed or whatever, and the iPad's just fine inside.
Awesome. Well, Dave, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your story.
Could we talk about the blog real quick? People are asking.
Absolutely. Dave, can we plug the Next Tech thing real quick, your blog?
Sure. Yeah, and I don't know how easy it is to jump back to that slide without making people dizzy here going through a bunch of slides again. But basically it's, if you just Google Next Tech Thing, and maybe, I don't know, I was going to say it's nexttechthing.blogspot.com is the blog itself.
I don't think we're going to be able to grab it.
So it was...
Oops, sorry.
Okay. It was the one that had the invite to Minnetonka on the... There we go.
There we go.
That one there. So if you can just put that up, that's the URL at the bottom of the screen there. thenexttechthing.blogspot.com is where I blog. I do a lot of blogging about how we're using technology in Minnetonka. Passion area of mine is digital citizenship and helping kids use both their educational and their personal devices in appropriate and healthy ways. And so I've got a lot of articles for parents and for educators on helping kids on those topics. So hopefully you find the information useful there, and we've got lots of free resources and things up there with much more detail about our technology and our iPad program in Minnetonka.
Thank you so much, Dave, for coming in today and sharing your story with us. And thank you, everyone that was able to join us today. Have a good rest of your week.
All right. Thanks, everyone.